Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the philosophy of a guy who was equal parts Nobel Prize-winning genius and leather jacket-wearing, cigarette-smoking rebel, Albert Camus. Believe it or not, before he became a total philosophical icon, he was actually a passionate football goalkeeper. We're going to be exploring a concept today that sounds incredibly heavy at first, but stick with me. I promise you by the end of our time together, we're going to demystify what seems like a very dark philosophy and reveal it to be a surprisingly triumphant, joyful worldview.
All right, part one, the serious philosophical problem. This is where we set up those ultimate life or death stakes.
Camus kicks things off with a seriously provocative claim. He says, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Wow, right? He basically argued that all those other high-level philosophical debates, like whether the world has three dimensions, how the brain categorizes concepts, or if we have an immortal soul, they're just secondary games. They literally don't matter until we first decide definitively if life itself is actually worth living. So, to get why he frames it with such heavy stakes, we've got to talk about his core concept, the absurd. Now, the absurd isn't just random chaos, and it's definitely not just feeling sad. It's actually a relational concept. It's born right out of the intense friction between two very specific, colliding realities. Picture this collision. On one side, you have us, humanity, with this deeply ingrained craving for order, purpose, meaning, and clarity. On the other side, reality, a cold, silent, completely indifferent universe that flat out refuses to give us those answers. The absurd is the spark that flies when these two massive forces smash together. So the big question is, once we realize this absurdity, is checking out physical suicide, which removes our side of the equation, is that the only logical response? Well, Camus says absolutely not. Physical suicide is just an evasion. Moving on to section 2, hitting the absurd walls. This is about how ordinary people suddenly encounter this void in everyday life. So how exactly do we hit these walls? Well, think about the pure mechanical routine of daily life. You know the drill. Waking up, catching the train, working for 8 hours, eating, sleeping, and doing it all over again Monday through Saturday. Or think about the brutal reality of time and aging. Realizing that this future we're constantly planning for is actually just carrying us closer to physical dissolution. Maybe you suddenly notice how completely alien and strange nature really is, or how bizarre other people look when you just watch them without hearing what they're saying. And of course, the ultimate wall, the absolute mathematical certainty of death. Let me ask you, have you ever been on complete autopilot, going through the motions, and then suddenly you just stop and ask, why? Have you ever had that sudden wave of weariness where the comfortable little stage sets of your daily routine just totally collapse and you're left staring into the stark reality of existence? That profound, kind of unsettling pause right there, that is the encounter with the absurd. Which brings us to part 3, the trap of false hope. Because let's be real, when we hit that wall, we usually panic. Let's look at how humanity desperately tries to escape this harsh diagnosis. Camus actually goes after some of the heaviest hitters in philosophy here, guys like Karl Jaspers, Lev Shestov, Soren Kierkegaard, and Edmund Husserl. He says, look, these thinkers correctly diagnosed the pain of the absurd. They looked right into the void, but they blinked. They committed what Camus calls philosophical suicide by taking a leap of faith. They essentially sacrificed their intellectual honesty just to invent these comforting transcendent cures. Things like an incomprehensible God, a divine reality, or some cosmic order. Anything rather than just living with the diagnosis. He even points out that the brilliant novelist Franz Kafka fell into this exact same trap. Kafka did an amazing job capturing the feeling of the absurd through his stories about these massive, incomprehensible bureaucracies. But tragically, Kafka eventually surrendered too. He smuggled hope back in by turning that cold indifference into a symbol of some mysterious divine authority. Because it's so easy to fall into this trap, we really need to separate Camus from his contemporaries. Take existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre, who basically said, life has no meaning, so go ahead and create your own subjective meaning. Camus totally rejects that. He argues that inventing your own subjective meaning is just another comforting illusion. We actually have to live without meaning and maintain that tension. To Camus, hope is a dangerous evasion. We've got to abandon it entirely. All right, section 4, living the absurd life. If we aren't going to choose physical suicide, and we absolutely refuse to invent some kind of false hope, how do we actually live day to day? Camus offers 3 really profound consequences of fully accepting the absurd. First up is revolt.
This is a constant, wide-awake confrontation with our limits, without ever backing down or submitting. Second is freedom. Since there's no grand divine plan, we are completely off the hook from future anxiety. And third, passion. This one is absolutely key. Since there is no eternal afterlife to worry about, Camus shifts the focus. Instead of seeking some eternal quality of life, we should be going after a massive quantity of experiences, right here, right now, in the present.
To help us picture what this looks like, Camus gives us a couple of archetypes. First, you have Don Juan, but not the romantic looking for his soulmate. No, this Don Juan seduces passionately just to compress as many lives as humanly possible into the immediate present, knowing perfectly well that his youth is going to fade. Then you have the actor. This is someone who lives entirely in the fleeting present, squeezing all the triumphs and tragedies of dozens of different destinies into brief, intensely conscious 3-hour performances right before the curtain drops.
Then there's the conqueror. This archetype doesn't fight to build some utopian empire for the future, because they know, eventually, all empires crumble. Instead, the conqueror acts for immediate, concrete change. They fight injustice right here, right now. They find profound, lasting dignity in the sheer defiance of the fight itself, rather than needing a guarantee of eternal victory.
Finally, we have the absurd creator. Absurd art is about describing reality, not trying to explain it. Think of Dostoevsky's character Krylov, who attempts a metaphysical suicide just to prove humanity is totally free. Now, Dostoevsky himself kind of retreated into religious hope later on, but characters like Krylov show us that the absurd artist creates temporary art just to mirror human consciousness. They do this fully knowing that the art, just like the artist, will eventually turn to dust. Which brings us to part 5. The myth of Sisyphus. This is the climax of our explainer, where Camus beautifully ties all these intense philosophical threads together using an ancient Greek myth. Think about the sheer, incredible defiance of King Sisyphus and what he did to the gods. First off, the guy literally chained up death itself so that no human would ever have to suffer and die. Then he tricked the lord of the underworld so he could sneak back to the mortal realm. And finally, because he was just so deeply passionate about the physical world, the warm sun, the blue sea, he flat out refused to go back to the dark underworld. His fierce love for life and his total hatred of death, it absolutely infuriated the gods.
So the gods came up with a punishment they thought would break him completely. They condemned Sisyphus to eternally push this massive boulder up a ridiculously steep mountain, only to watch it roll all the way back down to the plain, over and over and over again. The gods figured there was literally nothing more dreadful than totally futile, hopeless labor.
But here's what's so fascinating. Look at where Camus actually tells us to focus. He doesn't care about Sisyphus struggling to push that rock up the hill. No, he says, look at the descent. Once the rock rolls back down, Sisyphus has to turn around and slowly walk back down the mountain to start all over again. That brief pause, that is the hour of consciousness. Sisyphus is completely perfectly aware of his wretched, unending fate. And right there, Camus hits us with this unbelievably powerful, victorious twist. He writes, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Wait, happy? How? Because Sisyphus is conscious. By completely abandoning any hope that the rock will ever stay at the top, he strips the gods of their power to torture him. He reclaims his own life. That rock is his domain.
Which leaves us with one final, absolutely crucial question for you. The universe might be indifferent, it might be completely silent. But your rock is your own. Your daily routines, your limits, your struggles, they belong to you. And by facing them with clear-eyed defiance and a real passion for the present, you can actually live with the triumphant joy of the absurd man. So, how are you going to push your rock tomorrow?
Please like and subscribe.